Our next speaker, Ted R. Hunt, is the Senior Advisor to the Attorney General on Forensic Science at the Department of Justice. In that capacity, he serves as the department's lead advisor on all issues involving forensic science policy and practice. Cat herding, in short. Prior to this appointment, Mr. Hunt served as the Chief Trial Prosecutor in Jackson County, Kansas City, Missouri, had a large staff of trial attorneys, and has personally tried over 100 felony trials, jury trials. These involve the litigation of forensic science. Mr. Hunt is a former member of the National Commission on Forensic Science, ASCLD Lab Board of Directors, Missouri Crime Lab Review Commission, and the OSAC Legal Resource Committee. We're proud that he is a fellow in our own jurisprudence section. And Ted, I know you got a tough act to follow, but I know you're up to it. Ted Hunt.
All right. Thanks for that introduction, Jamie, and thank you, Bonnie, for that inspiring story. And by the way, Kayla made the right career choice, not going into the law. It's a great honor for me as a fellow in the jurisprudence section to address this 71st annual scientific meeting of the Academy. And it's also a great pleasure for me to be away from Washington, D.C. for a little while. I want to thank my friend Sue Ballou here on my left for her leadership of the Academy over the past year. Congratulations, Sue, on a job well done. I also want to thank the Plenary Committee for inviting me to speak and for sticking with me over the last couple of weeks as they stared squarely into the face of a possible government shutdown and coming up one plenary speaker short. They didn't blink, so thank you, Jamie and Ken. But most of all, I want to thank the forensic scientists at this meeting across the country and around the world for the work that you do every day to advance the cause of justice through the practice of science. Thomas Huxley, a very quotable 19th century English biologist, once said, "Learn what is true in order to do what is right." And to me, that simple sentence fully defines and describes both the cause and the call of the forensic scientist. Most of you are from agencies that have small budgets and you have big caseloads. You work from a cubicle, not a corner office. You're highly educated, but most of you, unfortunately, won't ever be rich or famous. And despite the fact that you're scientists, the only thing that you'll ever know to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty is that no matter what you say, somebody's not going to like the answer. But you have a privilege that few share. You are able to come to work every day with the freedom to pursue the truth, to pursue the facts, not the factions, without fear or favor, in search for what's true in order to do what's right. So on behalf of the Attorney General, I want to thank each and every one of you for what you do every day and your devotion to truth through the practice of forensic science. At the Department of Justice, our top priorities are to reduce violent crime, to increase public safety, and to work for true and just outcomes for all parties. And the responsible use of reliable forensic evidence greatly advances those goals. You know that very well, and so do I. As some of you may know, I'm a former prosecutor from Kansas City, and I spent over 26 years working on cases that involve forensic evidence. And during that time, I've seen the incredible impact that it can have on the lives of so many people, helping to convict the guilty and to clear the innocent. And in the days before DNA, and yes, they did exist, there was such a time, I worked with a wide variety of traditional forensic evidence like fingerprints, hair comparison, and firearms and tool marks. And time and again, I saw the great value that it could bring to law enforcement, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and finders of fact in our collective search for the truth. One of my first trials as a prosecutor was the burglary of the Holy Rosary Catholic Convent. And there is a senior laboratory director here who was involved in this case who will know exactly how the story unfolds, who was a young trace analyst at the time. But as you can imagine, given the facts, it was a high-profile crime and there was lots of pressure to solve the case. Well, investigators methodically processed the scene, taking photographs, dusting for fingerprints, and collecting all the trace evidence they could find. It was all sent to a small and cramped building just south of our courthouse, where investigators poured through the evidence. Well, fingerprint lists from the convent were examined, and some were found to be suitable for comparison. One latent print in particular from the point of entry was uploaded to an early version of our local APHIS system, and a list of candidate matches came back. Examiners pulled known print cards for these suspects and compared them to the print left behind at the point of entry, which was a bathroom window on a second-story deck of this convent building. I'll always remember the fingerprint examiner's story about the exact moment when she realized what she'd found, a match between the print on the window and one of the suspects on the list. She told me that she was momentarily paralyzed by the significance of what she'd seen. Well, the suspect was soon arrested and more evidence was tested. 3 hairs collected from the victim's bed were found to be microscopically similar to the suspect's known hair. But for me, the most amazing piece of evidence was a single hair collected from the bottom of a sock found inside of the suspect's home. It was microscopically similar to the victim's pubic hair standard. Well, apparently the suspect had taken off his shoes to avoid making noise during the burglary. A pubic hair from the victim, probably on her bathroom floor at the point of entry, had stuck to the bottom of his sock and stayed in place as he put on his shoes to make his escape. And at the time I tried the case, the only available DNA technology was RFLP, and some of the old-timers in the audience will recall that that was a system that required about a quarter-size stain or sample to get a result. Well, to make matters worse, mitochondrial DNA wasn't in wide use at the time. It was just under development, so we didn't have access to that either. So at the time of trial, we didn't have any DNA evidence. But in light of what we did have, that didn't matter. The defendant, Jerry Owens, was convicted and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms, plus an additional 60 years in prison. But both at trial and during the years that followed, Owens had always strongly and consistently maintained his innocence. 10 years after his conviction, he convinced a large Kansas City law firm to take his case and to file a motion for post-conviction DNA testing. Well, the court granted the motion, and the evidence hairs were sent to a lab in California for mitochondrial DNA testing. Analysts developed a mito profile from each hair. Each profile was then compared to Owens. A report was written. The attorneys were notified. A conference call was calendared. And on that day, science had the final say. The verdict came in, and he was a perfect match to each hair. In that case, post-conviction testing affirmed Owens' guilt, and it also confirmed the relevance and the reliability of the fingerprint and hair evidence offered at trial 10 years earlier. Now, this is not an uncommon result. This happens all of the time. What is uncommon is the fact that you just heard about it. How many times do we hear about the planes that land safely at the airport each day? We only hear about the crashes. Then we hear about the same crashes over and over again, as if the exception is the rule. In this field, the frequent focus on isolated failures has led to a carefully crafted, constantly reinforced, and patently false narrative that the forensic sky is falling. And it's simply not true. Forensic science isn't failing, it's flourishing. And it continues to give relevant and reliable answers to the legal system's most critical questions, just like those asked in the Owens case. From a legal perspective, relevance and reliability are the gateways to admissibility. For evidence to pass through these gates, it must be the product of scientific, technical, or other specialized knowledge. It is good grounds based on what is known. But fine distinctions between different types of knowledge are not just hard to make, just ask any philosopher of science. They're legally irrelevant. On this point, the Supreme Court has said, quote, "It would prove difficult, if not impossible, for judges to administer evidentiary rules if the gatekeeping role depended on a distinction between scientific knowledge and technical or other specialized knowledge. And conceptual efforts to distinguish the two are unlikely to produce clear legal lines capable of application in particular cases." The court also said that Rule 702 didn't create a schematism that segregates expertise by type while mapping certain kinds of questions to certain kinds of experts. Life and the legal cases that it generates are too complex to warrant so definitive a match, end quote. In other words, it's the reliability of the knowledge, not its name or its nature, that's key to its admissibility. But we humans, especially lawyers and scientists, have a compelling need, it seems, to categorize and classify, and along the way, many times, to oversimplify as we try to pigeonhole people, professions, and different principles of knowledge into separate bins or boxes with bright lines and barriers between them. But in reality, those lines aren't very bright at all. In fact, they're very blurred. And what's legally important is not the type of knowledge in question. It's whether or not that knowledge, however it's defined or described, is reliable. Now, that doesn't diminish the importance of science. It's proven to be our most reliable form of knowledge. But science, like other types of knowledge, is a continuum. It's not a corridor. Famous astronomer Carl Sagan once said that science is a way of thinking much more than it is a body of knowledge. His point highlights the fact that science is an inescapably human endeavor and cannot be practiced and has no existence apart from the humans who practice it. Rigorous and validated observation, interpretation, and judgment are core components of good science, and they're also key components of good expert testimony in the legal system. The fact finder, whether a judge or a jury, needs that expertise to place forensic findings in their proper context. Those findings often corroborate or confirm other evidence, as they did in the Owens case. But in other cases, at other times, they exculpate and exonerate the accused. But in either case, they help us learn what's true so that we can all do what's right. At the Department of Justice, getting it right is what we're all about. We know the importance of research, clear standards, transparency, and professional accountability to both science and the law. Since 2009, NIJ has awarded over $227 million to support over 500 forensic science research grants. And since the year 2000, that figure is an incredible $2 billion spent on research and development. That funding has helped support exciting new advances in testing and technology. We'll soon see the widespread use of rapid DNA in crime labs and in booking stations. Sophisticated software systems are now being used to resolve DNA mixtures. And even more advanced DNA technologies like next-generation sequencing will soon be ready to tackle some of our most challenging forensic samples. Other technologies like 3D imaging and the optical analysis of latent prints, tool marks, and shoe mark features are in advanced stages of research and development. And these tools and many others will soon be ready to enhance both the capability and reliability of forensic testing. Last year at this plenary session, the Deputy Attorney General announced approval and posting of uniform language for testimony and reports in the latent print discipline. And since that time, the department has approved and posted 12 additional uniform language documents, with more on the way very soon, that describe the scope and the limitations of expert opinions that may be offered by department examiners. And these documents work hand in glove with the department's testimony monitoring program, online access to our key quality assurance requirements, lab policies, and testing procedures. Well, as forensic technology advances, so does the work on national standards and best practices. And I want to recognize the enormous energy, efforts, and accomplishments of the Organization of Scientific Area Committees, OSAC, and our partners at NIST over the last 5 years. OSAC is making steady progress with dozens of forensic standards currently under construction and consideration. And these standards, once approved, will form a strong foundation for our collective forensic thought and practice in the years to come. This academy as well, through its American Standards Board, also plays a critical role in this process, and we recognize your important contributions to creating quality national forensic standards. But as standards continue to develop, I think it's important to remember that we can't let the perfect become the enemy of the good. Today's standards must reflect our best current knowledge, not our best possible knowledge, because forensic findings must address current and critical real-world questions, those that need answers today, whether they're asked in Kansas City, Bakersfield, or right here in Baltimore. And to that point, Martin Fisher, who was a German-born physician and author, once remarked that truth is rarely writ in ink. It lives in nature. And I think we too need to remember that our forensic knowledge of nature can't be fully captured by pen and paper. It has to constantly be pursued by those who seek the truth. And over time, as our knowledge advances, so too must the writings that reflect the current state of that pursuit. But to me, the larger point is that less than perfect standards don't defy science. They actually define science. Scientific knowledge is never settled, is always contingent, and is constantly corrected, re-examined, and revised. And along these same lines, I think it's also important to remember that the aspirational may be inspirational, but it's not necessarily operational. We need to mind the distinction between the constancy and the consistency of a perfect world and the complexity, the enormous complexity, the differences and the diversity that exists in the real world. And that means drafting forensic standards at the right level of generality to account for the real differences between the people who use them, the places where they work, and the problems that they face. Standardized guidance must always be somewhat customized to fit the unique needs of different environments, different instruments, and the different individuals who follow it. A one-size-fits-all approach is neither realistic nor scientific. Now, by the same token, the flexibility required by forensic diversity must always be consistent with sound science and technical truths. Our differences are not an excuse to ignore or abandon core principles or best practices. The key is to find and then mind the right balance between the uniformity of a perfect world and the operational flexibility needed in the real world of diverse forensic practice. But that diversity isn't just limited to our crime labs. Just look at this academy with its 11 sections, over 7,000 members, and now over 70 years of service. We're more than our partner scientists who spend their days in a laboratory. We're a wide collection of people, professions, and priorities. We come from different backgrounds, we work in different fields, and we have sometimes very different points of view about the best path forward. And that diversity can be a great strength, but diversity can also bring the risk of division. Some of the current criticism of forensic science is very fair, balanced, and constructive. But much of it is also strategic, dishonest, and destructive. Some of it is little more than agenda-driven advocacy in the guise of promoting scientific purity, a genre that I call forensic science fiction. And that further divides us, creating factions, suspicion, and dissension. And people who should be working together instead go their separate ways and only speak to the like-minded, while they carefully curate their own pre-existing beliefs and biases. Some only speak to forensic scientists through written rebukes in published articles or op-ed hit pieces, or by promoting and stoking what I call junk journalism, media stories full of partisan misinformation, straw man arguments, and half-truths about forensic science. I think we should all agree there's a much better path forward. Diligence to the effort, dedication to the details, and devotion to this field mean that all of us, whatever our role in the system, must work together and rededicate ourselves to a common cause. As Huxley put it, learning what is true in order to do what is right. And that's a shared goal that should define us and unite us, not divide us. So to the stakeholders here who want to make a real and lasting difference in this field, take the example of those who publish with forensic scientists, not at forensic scientists. Those who collaborate more and excoriate less. And those who truly partner with forensic scientists rather than patronize them. And that's not to say that fair, honest, and constructive criticism isn't good. It's not only good, it's absolutely essential for knowledge to advance and for practice to improve. We all have blind spots, biases, and beliefs that need to be challenged and refined, or sometimes completely rejected and replaced. At the same time, I think it's important to remember that the spirit, the tone, and the purpose of our comments can sometimes mean the difference between building a lasting bridge or a permanent barrier. Once trust is broken, it's very hard to mend. Let me take a moment and share a few thoughts with the forensic scientists in this room. I would ask that you not let the criticism make you stop listening to the critiques. Criticism can be many things. It can be painful, it can be annoying, it can be flat wrong, and it can be completely unfair. But open and honest criticism can also be the catalyst for conversation, constructive change, and continual advancement. George Bernard Shaw once said, "Every person who has mastered a profession is a skeptic concerning it." Great science happens because great scientists are the biggest skeptics of their own work. They're critical thinkers, they're open to criticism, and they have thick skin. In fact, what good lawyers do in the courtroom is what good scientists do in the lab. They question, they criticize, and they cross-examine. See, you're not that different from lawyers after all. So don't get complacent about what you do or how you do it. If you have a policy, a procedure, or a method, always try to improve it or even throw it out when something better comes along. And don't ever let the fact that a method is legally admissible be the sole reason to say that it's scientifically acceptable. Legal decisions must not lead to scientific satisfaction and professional stagnation. Instead, always try to improve upon what you do and how you do it, making it more rigorous, more robust, and more reliable. The self-correcting nature of science is one of its greatest strengths. But great science doesn't happen without great scientists. Always try and strive every day to be a great scientist first. Great practice follows great practitioners. So in closing, as this meeting continues, challenge yourselves to consider different positions and different possibilities about the best path forward. Forensic science needs extraordinary scientists. So I'd ask you to take a moment every morning and challenge yourself each day to inspire others, to improve your skills, to increase your knowledge, and to advance your discipline. And why is that so important? Because what you do is so important. What you do doesn't simply result in a technical triumph that makes life a little bit easier, a little more convenient, or a little more amusing. And it's not something that we can simply take for granted, incorporate into our daily lives, and forget about. Because what you do is more notable and more noble than any of that. You practice science for the cause of justice. Winston Churchill once said, "We make a living by what we get. We make a life by what we give." What you give by your diligence to your disciplines, your dedication to the details, and your devotion to this field helps answer some of society's most serious and sobering questions. Will someone's reputation be spared or shattered? Will someone go home or go to prison? Will someone be cleared or will they be condemned? Always remember that being a forensic scientist is a tremendous privilege, but it's also a tremendous responsibility. So on behalf of the Department of Justice, I want to thank you all for the work that you do, day in and day out, to learn what is true in order to do what is right, advancing the cause of justice through the principled practice of forensic science. Thank you.